On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we'll look at some of the top news stories from the past week, as well as speak with Affirmed Networks on its analysis of total cost of ownership for NFV deployments.
Today's episode is brought to you by Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board. telecomcareers.net.
Well, thanks for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News. We'll start off by looking at some of the top news stories of the past week. A new report from Strategy Analytics predicts that big data analytics software will generate $81 billion in revenue by 2022, more than double the $36.2 billion expected to be generated globally this year. In the report, the firm explained that increased use of analytics by corporations, particularly in the healthcare, financial, industrial, and manufacturing IoT vertical market segments, enable them to interpret the vast amounts of data they generate and respond to market dynamics in ways that benefit the corporations as well as its customers. Among specific verticals, Strategy Analytics predicts that healthcare market will see a boost in software revenue from less than $8 billion this year to $17 billion by 2022, while the financial software sector was projected to see worldwide revenue increase from $6.9 billion this year to $13.8 billion by 2022. As for the software itself, Strategy Analytics predicts that much of it will be open source, which it claims is less expensive than proprietary software and can be run on commodity hardware that vendors expect will broaden its appeal to small and mid-sized businesses and mid-sized enterprises. Also, cloud networking provider Aryaka recently said it had entered into a strategic partnership with KDDI subsidiary Telehouse Europe to become the preferred data center partner for Aryaka as it looks to expand using the Telehouse global footprint. The company said the deal will allow both to leverage complementary technologies, including Aryaka's optimization technology that will be hosted in Telehouse and interconnected via KDDI's global network. Aryaka noted the move was its first step in establishing a long-term partnership with Telehouse Europe as it looks to further penetrate the global enterprise WAN market. Aryaka claims its software-defined private WAN as a service model provides enterprise-grade connectivity using patented TCP optimization, compression, and application acceleration technology. Telehouse, for its part, added that the hosting model will enable it to expand connectivity options for customers and boost its Telehouse enhanced Connect optimization service offerings. Well, recently we had a chance to talk with Affirmed Networks, which has been doing a lot of work in the NFV space. One of the things we talked about was its work in looking at total cost of ownership for NFV deployments as operators look to further enhance and embed NFV technologies into their networks. Let's take a look at that interview now. All right, well, this week we're joined by Angela Whiteford, who's the VP of Marketing and Product Management at Affirmed Networks, to talk a bit about the NFV space. Hey, Angela, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great. Well, maybe give a little bit of maybe an overview of the company for those who might not know much about Affirmed Networks. How do you guys participate in the telecom space?
Sure. Affirmed was formed in 2010, so we're about 5 years old. Mm-hmm. We're based in Acton, Massachusetts, probably a little around 250 employees, and the majority of the employees are actually here in Acton. Mm-hmm. So like most companies in our space, a large engineering organization, and we're all based here in Acton.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. Well, I guess, I'm sorry, keep going.
No, in terms of what we do, if you think about the telco space and the telco network, specifically the mobile networks, mm-hmm. What we did was we took everything from the radio, from the eNode B, all the way out to the internet, and we collapsed that functionality and we virtualized it. And what's interesting, people talk about 2012, that's when people really started talking about NFV and the ETSI SIG came together. We were really fortunate because in 2010, we took a look at the big problem, which is mobile data growth is going like this, and the cost to support that is continuing to grow like this, but the ARPU is kind of sitting like this, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with that? And so fortunately, Affirmed actually very early on came out with a fully virtualized mobile packet core. So when the SIG came together in 2012, and they were asking, this is the architecture we want, we were able to come to the table and say, here you go. And so again, what we've virtualized is the Evolve packet core, mm-hmm. and then all the GI LAN services associated with that. So that's deep packet inspection, that's video optimization, content filtering, heuristics, all the security components as well, like NAT, firewall, and so forth.
Very good. So you guys have quite an extensive history then, obviously, in this space. I mean, I know for myself, I've been covering for just a couple of years now, but it definitely seems like there's been a lot of evolution in the market over the past couple of years. It sounds like you guys have been probably seen a lot of that as well. So
we have.
As you look at the market now, I mean, what's kind of the general view of how we've kind of advanced in terms of, kind of moving from those early movements there to kind of a lot of POCs, a lot of organizations working on the standards. Where do you kind of view the market today?
Yeah, it's interesting because even if you look from, so a great event to judge market and trends and activity is Mobile World Congress. Yeah. If you look at Mobile World Congress over a year ago, almost nobody was talking about NFV. And then this latest Mobile World Congress 2015, NFV was in every single exhibit around, right? So that has changed. I think from an Affirmed perspective, for up until last year, there was a lot of evangelism. Mm-hmm. Really explaining what NFV was, the benefits of it, why operators should move to this new architecture. That's changed. In the last 12 months, there really has been this tipping point. Mm-hmm. And one of the big reasons for the tipping point, at least what we're seeing, is really around performance. Because that was the big objection that operators would talk about, which was they couldn't see that the virtualized architecture could meet the same performance as the purpose-built architecture and the purpose-built hardware, right? Mm-hmm. Or applications. And so that has really changed. With the chipsets from Intel coming on, we at least are able to go into deployments or go into trial activity and demonstrate that the virtualized architecture can perform the same or better than the current traditional hardware-based applications out there right now.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know I've talked to a lot of carriers about this, and like you said, they have become more comfortable with the performance aspect, but that was an initial question, was because, I mean, they've got certain, people talk about carrier grade or whatever their SLAs may be. It does seem like telecom operators have a certain level that they kind of need to meet in terms of quality and performance, and that was kind of always the concern. Was, you're right, I mean, they were very comfortable with the hardware that they've had. They know how it works, they know what it's going to do, and this move towards virtualization for a lot of these guys was a huge change in just their organizational structure, even. I mean, just how they did things.
Yeah, so absolutely.
There was a lot of questions about how, can they trust it? Will it be able to really do what I need it to do? But you're right, it does seem like over the past year, at least a lot of the POCs seem to be really bearing out that this is, performance-wise, it's able to handle what these operators need.
Well, and what's changed for us, just to further develop on that point, is what we've seen. We have about 25 commercial deployments right now and 40 trials. Well, that's almost tripled in the last 12 to 18 months from where we were. Mm-hmm. And that's because the early deployments are now into a scaling mode. Mm-hmm. And because that tipping point has happened, the amount of trial activity has increased substantially. But we've been fortunate. We have tier 1 operators in every geography that were active. A couple of them that you've heard about are, obviously, we were selected as part of AT&T's Domain 2.0. Okay. LGU Plus, which is the tier 1 operator in Korea, is another customer of ours. There's a number of them we can't talk about, but Western Europe, Canada, Asia Pac, Middle East, and Latin America. Again, we've been very fortunate that we have operators in all those markets, and they're scaling now.
Yeah, it's got to be very nice, too, to kind of have a product that you're not necessarily pushing on operators like in the old days, which vendors used to have to do. This is really, seems like a platform that carriers are asking for. I mean, it's like, I know, like you said, with AT&T with their domain program, they kind of went out ahead of time and said, hey, this is what we're looking to do. What can you guys do to help us out here? And it was a matter of everybody coming on board. It's okay, let's make this stuff work and come on board and do this. So it's got to be a different kind of mode of operation for a lot of vendors when it comes to, getting that carrier support from the get-go, really.
That's right. Definitely, especially having a tier 1 carrier like that, being a partner at the table and very focused in this, this new movement and this new architecture has been fantastic.
Yeah. I guess as you look at these initial commercialized rollouts of virtualization, what are you guys seeing as being, I guess, the first parts that carriers are really looking to virtualize? I mean, I know there's still, there's talk about at some point virtualizing everything out there, but, obviously you got to take your baby steps first. What are you seeing as being kind of the initial movement there in terms of virtualization?
I think it really goes back to where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck.
Okay.
So when you think about the mobile packet core or the EPC, that made a ton of sense, right? If you see the amount of data growth that the operators are experiencing and the revenue projections and then the cost to support it, that was just a very natural and obvious place to go and start in terms of virtualizing.
Yeah.
But there are so many others. Just recently we've announced our Wi-Fi gateway. So we have a fully virtualized Wi-Fi gateway, EPDG and TWAG, but that's another great example. Mobile operators are saying, how can I bring Wi-Fi and mobile together to offer an application like Wi-Fi calling? Mm-hmm. And how do I do that cost effectively? Because I think right now, one of the debates is, how do you monetize Wi-Fi? A lot of operators look at it as an offload or Wi-Fi calling, and Wi-Fi calling is more about subscriber experience, reducing churn. So a lot of it is an expense play, right? Reducing the costs. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great story for virtualization, right? Because you can introduce Wi-Fi access at a very low cost, and you can go and you can deploy it very quickly. So it becomes very attractive to them.
Yeah. And obviously the scalability of it all seems to kind of be a nice thing too, because again, if a carrier's rolling out some new applications that, they're not really sure how it's going to be taken in the market, or if they might need to adjust it, it's one of those things where you can roll it out. If it doesn't work right away, you can bring it back in pretty quickly. There's not a huge cost involved with it. That seems to be kind of key to a lot of this as well, because it does provide those operators with that scalability and that flexibility to really kind of try different things out there and not be burdened with this huge upfront cost involved.
No, that's such a great point. And actually, you're not investing in a lot of upfront cost initially. You can scale the demand, and you can scale it very cost effectively. The other thing about demand is the whole capacity dimension. Mm-hmm. One of the nice things about virtualization, and if you do it the right way, capacity, when you think about capacity, there's three dimensions. There's sessions, there's signaling or transactions, and then there's I/O. The way we're able to scale capacity is you can scale independently in those three dimensions. And you can't do that in the traditional or legacy architectures. Each blade has a fixed ratio of those three dimensions. So if you're doing an M2M application where it's really low throughput, but high sessions and high signaling, then you just scale in that dimension. So again, that really plays into that whole total cost of ownership and the ability to scale. And you can tailor your scaling and your cost directly to the application. And that's been really, really attractive to operators.
Yeah, well, obviously bring up the TCO aspect of this. I know you guys did some work recently with a research firm out there to kind of look at that TCO analysis. And that does seem to be a big part of, I guess, the kind of the, whether we do this or whether we not do this from a lot of operators. I know there's, they're still trying to get their head around the cost model when it comes to virtualization. Right. Again, they've spent this money already on a lot of equipment that's already out there. It's deployed. It's working for the most part. And so now they're like, well, why should I spend some more money on equipment that's going to do kind of the same thing I'm already doing? And that seems to be kind of what you guys dug into a bit, was kind of, I guess, getting past that barrier. But what did you guys find out in that TCO analysis that you guys did?
Right. No, that's a great point. So we did, in that analysis that was done by ACG Research, they looked at two deployment scenarios. They looked at one where it was a consumer network, and they looked at another one where it was a machine-to-machine network. Basically, in both, there was a couple of things that they found out. Cost savings come from two areas on the CapEx side. Cost savings come from collapsing functionality, and cost savings come from the virtualization. So one of the things in our platform is that we actually collapse functionality. So in the same architecture, in the same software image, you can have a P gateway, an S gateway, a GGSN, MME, and then you can have all the GI LAN functions, the DPI, the NAT firewall, and so forth. So collapsing saves you money. And also virtualizing, right? Running on the standard COTS and so forth saves you money. So it showed the difference. It compared the virtualized architecture against the traditional architecture and showing those savings. Because what you're doing in the consumer application, for example, in that application, they were modeling video. So to do that, you had one box that was doing the EPC functions. You had another box that was a load balancer, and you had another box that was doing the video optimization. So right there, you're dealing with three boxes versus one, as an example. That was one of the areas of savings. We also tried to, one of the things ACG was very clear on is they wanted to show realistic deployment. Yeah. So the analysis was, if the operator capped their existing traditional deployment and then grew with a virtualized deployment, what does that difference look like? So they showed one model where you grew with the traditional architecture, and then the other, it was a cap and grow. And what you could see in that was the amount of opex and capex savings by moving to the virtualized architecture. You were actually cash flow positive in year one and an ROI in less than 3 years. So that's pretty amazing when you think about, and it was a very typical tier one call model, and that's all in the research paper as well.
Yeah.
The other thing that the research looked at was also deployment times.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a look at how long does it take to deploy a virtualized network versus a traditional architecture. And in that situation, I think it was 6 months to deploy the virtualized architecture versus a 15-month deployment for the traditional architecture.
Yeah.
And again, you're dealing with 3 platforms versus dealing with 1 platform. You're dealing with 1 version of a code release versus 3 different software images, the testing and integration, the training. It's a very, very robust model that ACG uses to do these calculations. So the savings were substantial.
Yeah, and the timing of that seems pretty timely as well, because obviously a lot of operators are kind of at that stage now. They're like, again, the data demand is just growing so much, it's starting to throw new resources at that. But they're like, do I throw conventional resources at it? Do I just throw a spectrum at it? What do I do? Or do I take this next step and do virtualization? And again, that they're kind of making these decisions, now basically. So yeah, I mean, the timing of that kind of analysis seemed, like I said, pretty timely in the fact that people are looking at this model today, really, and that's kind of what they're doing today. So,
we've seen a lot of interest in that type of analysis, and it was good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I guess as you look forward, kind of to the growth and to the continued evolution of NFV and deployment models. I mean, do you see any sort of challenges, or what do you see as maybe some of the hurdles, maybe from a technology perspective first, and then maybe from a, I guess, deployment, I guess getting carriers more on board with it? I mean, I guess from a technology perspective, what do you see as perhaps being some of the big challenges going, over the next 6 to 12 months or so in terms of kind of getting everybody on board with the technology aspect of NFV?
I think from the technology aspect, there was something that you mentioned earlier that's really important. It's that concept of carrier grade.
Okay.
And so, especially when we're moving to open source environments that are typically working in a enterprise architecture, you're moving to a carrier environment, you're dealing with a packet forwarding type application like the mobile packet forward versus the transaction or web service type of application. Very different, right? Mm-hmm. You're dealing with stateful traffic versus stateless traffic, for example. These things all come into play. So from a technology perspective, making sure that taking these great applications and technology from enterprise and making them carrier grade. One of our partners has done a very good job of this, HP, which took the OpenStack environment and put a few capabilities and functionalities in that to make sure that it was robust for a carrier environment. So their Helion carrier grade is a nice example of that. I think in terms of performance too, you need to think about, and actually the industry has really come to the table with the different types of performance options for operators. I think that's actually moved very well, and I don't think that's going to be a challenge going forward. I think just in general, making sure you're keeping that carrier grade in the back of your mind, that the industry really needs to think about that, and they're doing a good job, so we just need to continue to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point there.
I think from a market standpoint, one of the challenges we've seen in terms of deployments, obviously there's a lot of traction and there's a lot of activity and the networks are scaling. But there's this, I call it, not all NFV is created equal. And so one of the challenges that when you're competing with incumbents, the incumbents obviously have a great product already in place. And so the operators will say, okay, well, we're going to come together and we're going to do a trial. And when we go into trials, we're competing with something that's not really there yet. And that actually slows down the deployments, candidly, right? Sure. Or that's something that's not truly virtualized. It's on the path, and everybody's eventually going to get there. But a lot of NFV-based solutions today are typically ported solutions from a legacy architecture into a virtualized environment. So you don't get the performance, you don't get the independent scaling, you don't get some of that unique collapse functionality or the level of robustness and redundancy that you require. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's one of the challenges we at Affirmed feel is, we've done a good job of building a very robust product, and then when we go into deployments, we come up against the incumbents where they don't truly have a virtualized solution yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess does that play a bit into the need for standards when it comes to what NFV is all about? Because I mean, I know that's still being worked on. A lot of organizations are working on it, whether it's Etsy or OP-NFV. I mean, all these different, groups out there that are trying to work towards some sort of, cohesiveness when it comes to this. I know it seems like I don't want to say we're still early in the process, but there's still a lot of work obviously needs to be done when it comes to this. I mean, how important are the standards process, and are we making progress in terms of working towards some sort of standard where when you go into these POCs that, everybody is bringing the same language to the table?
That's right. I think we're getting there. I think there's definitely progress, right? I think it's going to take a little bit of time in terms of educating the operators on what's truly a cloud native application or an NFV application and what those requirements are. Mm-hmm. They've had a number of years in terms of requirements of what a traditional hardware-based packet core looks like, for example. But now you move to the NFV world. Okay, what are the things you should expect? What are the requirements? What does that architecture need to look like? I think there's some work that needs to be done there. I think some of the testing activity and the validation activity that's going on, I think are great examples of things that are needed in the industry to help deal with that situation. And so that's all goodness for us.
Yeah, it is a good point, because I've talked to a lot of companies, and when I talk to those who are perhaps maybe the more established vendors, obviously I think we know who those are, and then you talk to kind of the ones who are coming maybe more from the data center world or the IT world. It is a different mindset, because it does seem like the traditional guys are traditional. They're conservative perhaps in other approaches. Obviously, they want to kind of keep the customers they have now. They don't want to lose a lot of business, so they have a certain way of doing things. Where the ones who come from the data center world or the IT world, those companies seem to be a little more nimbler, quicker on their feet. They want to do things faster. They've got great ideas. They're not burdened down by a lot of legacy equipment. And so it does seem like that there is kind of this merging of how things are being done. And I know from the carrier's point of view, they want new people involved. I mean, obviously the domain program from AT&T was a way to get new people on board. I mean, they don't want to have to always deal with the same companies over and over again. They want to bring new blood in. And so it does seem like that is kind of where we are, is a bit of a challenge when it comes to making sure that all the companies are involved or are kind of on the same wavelength, I guess, and make sure they're all working towards the same end goal, I guess.
We've always said that. Absolutely. I think you really hit it on the head, which is we're really fortunate. When we started 5 years ago, we were able to start with a clean sheet of white paper. Yeah. We didn't have a portfolio or an architecture already in place. And that allowed us to look at things differently. So when you talk about the smaller organizations that are coming from a different perspective, we were one of those fortunate ones to do that as well. Yeah. And I think what's great, is that the entire industry as a whole is going to converge onto cloud native applications. It's just everyone's coming at it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. The great news is just the uptick in momentum, the uptick in deployments, the uptick in trials. We're seeing it, and it's happening very, very quickly. So it's been really exciting for us.
Yeah, and it's nice also, I mean, again, I know there's always, people want to have timelines on how these things are going to all play out. I mean, people are expecting, they're expecting, huge commercial deployments this year, but, we're getting some deployments this year, and obviously 2016 is probably going to be a big year. Like you said, I'm sure Mobile World Congress next year, 2016 is going to be a big event. I'm sure, like you said, I know this year's event was big on NFV. I'm guessing next year will be, I don't know how much bigger it could be, but I'm guessing it'll be even a bigger part of next year. But it does seem like, I guess from a timing perspective, it is moving in the right direction. I think, like you said, the carriers are coming at it. They're all obviously involved in this. I mean, I know I've talked to some vendors, and they've said that if you don't have NFV solutions somewhere in your platform, the carriers won't even talk to you at this point. You got to have it in there, or they're not going to even talk to you about deployment. So it does seem like it's all at least moving in the right direction, and eventually, everybody will get there at some point.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things I predict for Mobile World Congress 2016 is that you're going to hear a number of carriers not just talking about initial deployments, they're talking about scaling. Yeah. That's what I think for the early adopters out there, I think they are definitely going to be standing up and very proudly talking about, the multi-millions of subscribers they're running in a fully virtualized environment.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know AT&T, at least here in the U.S., has been very vocal about their progress when it comes to their SDN rollouts. Yeah. I know in Europe, I know Telefonica has been doing quite a bit of work. Docomo's doing a lot of work in Korea as well. So yeah, that's probably a good point. I'm sure we'll see a lot more people actually talking about what they've done and scalability. But that's going to be that'll be the big part of Mobile World Congress next year. But that sounds great. Well, Angela, we definitely appreciate the great insight on this today. Obviously, you guys are in the thick of all of this and doing a lot of great work there. So we appreciate the time and insight on this, and hopefully we can talk again soon on the topic with you guys.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Great. And thanks everyone again for watching this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, and make sure to check us out again next week.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN, and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.